You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. You wanted it, you got it. A radio program that helps teach you options trading inside and out, basic to complex. This is Options Bootcamp. Whether you want to learn how to protect your portfolio, generate income, or even become a master of volatility, the Options Bootcamp drill instructors will break it all down for you. Now, let's get you into peak options trading shape. Here are your Options Bootcamp drill instructors.
All right, everybody. That music means we are back to kick off a new year, bright and early, hot and heavy, with everyone's favorite options educational program. Yes, it is time once again for Options Bootcamp, the first episode for the new year, 2023. My name, of course, Mark Longo from theoptionsinsider.com. I want to wish all of you out there happy, healthy, safe new year. Hopefully we can all collectively as a society have a little bit of a quieter, at least a start to the new year. Last couple of years, not been that great in that department, but let's see. Maybe we can all collectively put our thoughts together and make something happen out there. Either way, hope you had a great new year, you and yours out there. Welcome to all of our friends out there who joined us on the Pro towards the end of the year. In fact, we're just coming off of our first Pro Q&A session of the year just a few minutes ago. If you want to check that out with the greasiest of meatballs, Mr. Mark Sebastian from OptionPit.com. You want to check that out as well as all the other Pro Q&As we've done. Coming up on 200 episodes on that exclusive Pro podcast feed, including great Options Oddities episodes we do every week where we break down the crazy week that was from an unusual activity perspective. Usually make some trades that we have fun with or come to regret later. All sorts of fun being had on that show, as well as, of course, live access to this, to the Pro Q&A we just did, everything else we do here on the networks. If you want to heckle my co-host here, Mr. P, live, you got to head on over to theoptionsinsider.com/pro, or for you cool kids /secret club, click on that join button and you could join us with the party. Also, it's time. It's January, so we're going to be giving away soon. Not today because I haven't fired up the number generator, but soon we will be giving away the December Pro Trading Crate. Remember, you had to be active in the Pro for the month of December to qualify for that. But good luck to all of you out there as I welcome on my cohort, my compatriot, my partner in all things Options Bootcamp crime, the black-hatted one himself, Mr. Dan Passarelli from Market Taker Mentoring. Mr. P, welcome back to Options Bootcamp for the first time in 2023, sir, and Happy New Year to you.
Well, hey, Mark, I'm glad to be back. Happy 2023 to you and to our listeners, and we're super excited to get this show into a whole new year, man.
Whole new year. Should be fun. I can't wait. So let's dive into it right now.
Well, in boots. Time for our favorite pastime, option drills. We're going to take the strategies learned during the show and teach you how they can be employed to achieve a specific objective. Do you hear me? Yes, sir!
All right, everybody. Welcome to our first option drills for this new year. And Dan, what better way to kick off the new year than by looking back at the mad, insane topsy-turvy year that was 2022. Hopefully a lot of you enjoyed our top 10 episodes of 2022. We put together for you a little holiday special for you at the end of last year. Judging from the numbers from last year, you folks enjoyed the previous year's one, so we wanted to make sure you got a taste for that again. We'll go through that a little bit later. Maybe we'll have Dan make some guesses. But before we get to that, Dan, obviously last year was just a completely bonkers year by just about every stretch of the imagination, certainly when it came to the market and to options and to volatility. So let's start there, sir. When you look back at last year, what really resonates for you? What really stands out from an options perspective, a vol, a general market perspective? What were the trades, the trends, the strategies, the developments? What really stands out in your mind when you think back on 2022, sir?
Well, wasn't it 2022? Wasn't it the beginning of 2022 when VXX decoupled or whatever it is you want to say, or was that 2021?
That was last year. That was kind of towards, I think, Q2, something around that is when it started just going off the rails. Yeah. Then it got back towards the end of the year. So are you a big VXX fan?
I was before it got messed up. I was trading it fairly regularly. And so, that's one that I sure remember pretty clearly. Just the volatility that played a big role into this year. That was definitely a big thing. I want to say this time last year, on this episode of last year, I talked about this 2022 being the year of the straddle, which I guess unfortunately ended up coming true. Unfortunately or fortunately. So I guess that's another thing that I would definitely look back on 2022, thinking of that as one of the major characteristics for sure.
And a lot of people have been looking back at last year, and especially towards the end of last year, and looking at just the expiration day trading phenomenon in SPX and saying last year was the year of zero DTE. Do you subscribe to that too, sir?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was amazing how that just sort of swept over from pretty early in the year through the end of the year. And it became like a really big thing, added a lot of volume to the exchanges and brokerage firms, and put some money in the pockets of the folks who were doing it right.
That it did. So listeners, I think we're probably going to have an episode about that, probably sooner rather than later, because it definitely is top of mind for a lot of you. And a lot of you out there, that was your kind of takeaway from the year. 2021 was the year of the meme stock and buying calls on said meme stock. And 2022 was the year of all things 0 days to expiration, the phenomenon that kind of came out of nowhere and took the options world by storm. So intriguing stuff. Let's keep rolling. Speaking of, you mentioned vol, Dan. At the end of the year, we do on our Volatility View show a fun guessing game with the audience. Everyone gets to guess where they think VIX will be at the end of the year. And we did it for, the end of last year. If I can pull up the numbers. Here we go. Last year, we asked you folks, where do you think VIX will close at the end of 2022? We gave you 4 ranges north of 25, so very elevated. Elevated somewhere between 20 and 25. Frothy between 15 and 20, or quiet below 15. And at the time, listeners, remember, we kicked off the year last year at the low for the year of VIX. VIX never looked back and kissed that level again. About a 1630 is where we were this time a year ago. So very different regime. I think that kind of colored some of this voting because 41.9% of you chose the 15 to 19.99 range. So firmly in the teens. The number 2 was about almost 28% chose below 15. So a good chunk of you, near over 2/3, chose in the teens, if not below 15. So very different than what we got. Elevated 20 to 25 came next, 18.6%. Only 11.6% of you came out and chose north of 25. Dan, we ran that same poll again this year, changed the numbers around a little bit. This year we said that the levels were explosive, so north of 26, moved them up pretty much 1 point. Juicy, 21 to 26. Mildly frothy, 16 to 21. Or the snooze fest, which is below 16. I love our colorful descriptions, listeners. So Dan, maybe let's start there before I reveal the results of our poll, because this one just expired. Where are you voting in that poll? B, where do you think our audience came in on that poll? No cheating. And then C, for our Vol guessing game on Crystal Ball, what is your specific VIX closing prediction for the end of the year, sir?
Well, let's see here. I would put my range in the juicy category, which is 21 to almost 26, right? So I'm in the juicy category.
Feeling juicy. Okay, I got you.
If I'm feeling juicy. And I would think that most of our audience also went that way because they're listeners to our show. I think, we haven't had your range and prediction and all that yet, but I feel like a lot of the time we think similarly. And just all the things that we've been talking about, that's definitely a stance that I see for this year and have been talking about that all through the fourth quarter. So I don't know, maybe I'm projecting. It's not necessary for our audience to have opinions exactly like ours, but I'm thinking they think like that as well. Now, as far as my specific prediction, and by the way, what is this the year that you give away the Ferrari for the person who gets closest, or?
Everyone except network hosts. They do not qualify for and it's actually a Lamborghini. I'm more of a Lamborghini guy. So the non-network affiliated people, they get the Lamborghini. You guys get a nice breadbasket.
I'm going to have Kathleen guess. I'm going to say that we close out the year at 2249.
An excellent pick year. Excellent pick, Dan. By the way, we did close this year, listeners. End of the year, 2167. So we came in for the last year range just in the elevated camp, just outside of frothy. And this year, Dan, you chose juicy. And our audience, I will say this, they're not consistent. Last year, they picked 15 to 20 range. This year, they went with the mildly frothy range, as we put it, 16 to 21. So they're still mostly feeling the teens by the end of the year with a little touch of 20 to 21 in there. Does that surprise you, sir?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I think it does a little bit. If the majority was snooze fest, I'd be really surprised. But I'm mildly surprised that they chose mildly frothy.
Yeah, it's not 2017 again. We're not going to be hanging out at 12 to 9 for the entirety of the year. But by the way, that still has to count as one of my biggest surprises of all time doing this network, certainly. And, the Trump administration rolls into office. Whatever you think of Trump, I think to a person on this network, everyone said, Trump, he sure as hell ain't a single-digit VIX president. You think of Trump, you think it's synonymous with volatility. And what did we have for that first year? The most boring year that we've ever had, the longest we've been running this network, which now, Dan, is 16 years, which is crazy. So that was kind of a big surprise to me. Hopefully we want to see a quieter, a calmer year. I don't know if you want a VIX in the 9 to 12 range. It's not exactly super exciting for anyone out there. So there you go, listeners, 2249. Our poll has expired. So hopefully you got your specific VIX prediction in for a chance to win fabulous prizes. If you didn't, if you missed it, because it just ended, I do believe, this morning. We didn't extend it through boot camp, which maybe we should have. So tell you what, listeners, because all you boot camp folks should have a chance to play too. If you get on over there to add options, if you're already following us, you can find the poll. It has ended. You could reply to that, or you can even just DM us if you want. And or just shoot us questions at theoptionsinsider.com. That email works. Say, this is my end of year VIX guess. And if you're within our ballpark, our 10th of a point margin of victory, you can win fabulous prizes. Maybe you too can be registered for the quote unquote Lamborghini, which now that I've said it, I have to deliver something like that. So it'll probably be a nice, here, Matchbox makes a nice Lamborghini these days, Dan. So no, it'll be something more fun than that. Listen, we have all sorts of fun prizes in store. So if you want to win fabulous prizes, questions at theoptionsinsider.com or at options on most of your major social media platforms, Twitter, StockTwits, all those platforms. We're on all of them at options over there. And Dan, speaking of 2022, one of the questions we had all year long was, can this crazy options party, can it possibly continue again? We came into 2020, we blew the doors off of it. Previously, we were seeing 3.5, 3.4, 3.7 billion contracts in a year. That was a pretty good year, 3.7 billion contracts. 2020 blows the doors off, 7.5 billion. Everyone's like, holy crap, what happened there? I personally, a lot of people didn't think, but I certainly didn't think we could sustain that coming into 2021. I was proven wrong. Nearly 10 billion contracts on the tape for 2021. So coming into last year, the question was, can this possibly continue? Can they even come close to 10 billion contracts again? I was on record saying I had my skepticism beaten out of me. At that point, I was willing to accept all things when it came to options volume. So Dan, do you think we did it? Do you think 2022 was a record year after all, sir? Did we beat 10 billion?
You know, it sure feels like it, especially with the 0 day to expiration stuff that's gone on, especially with all the volatility. And I mean, geez, I would say, having worked with tens of thousands of traders over the years, they've all gotten a lot more sophisticated over the last couple of years. I do believe that we had a record year this year. I haven't looked at the numbers yet, but I bet we did.
The numbers just came out officially from OCC yesterday, Dan, and the answer is yes. 10.38, almost 10.4 billion contracts changing hands last year. Mr. Dan, I do think you're right. I think the surge of 0 DTE in Q3 and Q4 last year certainly contributed to that. I mean, we were seeing of the top 40 most active contracts in SPX every day, 30, 35, 38 of them were 0 DTE. So it kind of fundamentally transformed how people were trading SPX. So that certainly did contribute to some of those numbers. But there you go. 10.4 roughly billion contracts on the tape last year. Also, listeners, average daily volume is now 41.3 million contracts. That means any given day, you're going to average around 41 million contracts. 4.5% increase in total volume compared to 2021, which in and of itself was already a record. Couple of other volume records last year. ETF, this is for December. This is for the month of December. ETF options volume at the end of the year was up 33.5% compared to December of 2021. So that's a pretty big boost. December, not usually known for being an active month, but a pretty good month this year. And index volume, again, going back to that 0 DTE stuff, up 34.1% from December of 21. And annual index volume up 43%. So big pop there. If you want to drill down really quickly for the total volume for OCC last year, it said it was about 10.3, almost 10.4 billion contracts. About 5.6 billion of that is equity options. 4 billion almost exactly is ETF options, and 721 million for index options. I got to believe with all the 0 DTE stuff, we're going to see the 1B handle for that probably next year. That puts us right around 10.3 billion. Tack on 55 million worth of VIX futures on top of it. That puts us close to 10.4 billion contracts out there. So Dan, yeah, a banger month by just about any measure out there, Dan. So I guess the question now is, can it continue in 2023, sir? What do you think?
I think it will, actually. I think we will set a new record this year. Not necessarily by leaps and bounds, but we typically climb a little bit every year. I mean, not every year, but most years. And I think we're on that trajectory. I think people are learning more and more about how options level the playing field between regular everyday traders and professionals, and just what a great tool they are. I think we're going to set a new record, Mark. I think we are.
I like it. I'm here for it, Dan. Last year didn't really have all of the catalysts you would normally look for a record options volume year, right? We had a strong down year in the major indices. That's usually not good for volume. We had people mostly starting to go back to work and do things that they used to do before the pandemic. So that also, maybe that day trading, stay at home trend was starting to wind down. So both of those things seem like they were maybe coming to an end. And yet it's clear from these numbers, Dan, that this options surge we've had since 2020 is here to stay. A little bit of a different beast. These people are here for the long game, which we love to see. Maybe you're listening to shows like this, or you're learning about options from your broker or guys like Dan. Whatever the case may be, you guys and gals are obviously putting the time in these days to actually learn what you're doing. So you're not just coming in for a few months, having a good time, and then blowing out in just a explosion of fire and thunder and never trading options again. You've been here now for a couple of years. So welcome back out there, Dan. Let's see if we can get the pulse of the audience, Dan, it's time. Beginning of the year, it's time for us to check up on the trends out there in the options market, courtesy of Google Trends data. Are you ready, Mr. P?
Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. Let's kick it off. Let's keep things simple to start. Let's just use the basic search term for options. Obviously, options can mean many different things. We will drill down in a little bit. We'll keep things light to start, listeners. How many people were searching for options throughout the entirety of this past year? If you ever looked at Google Trends data, you know they look at it from 0 to 100, 100 being the most active period and everything else being some percentage therein. So looking back over the past year, the high, the apex, the pin the needle, the 100 level, the most interest for options from a Google search perspective was April 3rd to 9th of last year. Interesting time frame. The low was on November 20th to 26th. They do it by week on Google Trends, listeners. That was a low of 76. And right now, we're still pretty much hanging out of that low, which is about a 77. But then again, not exactly surprising. We're just coming off the heels of the holidays, Dan. Everyone's busy doing other things. Options, usually not top of mind this time of year. So any thoughts or surprises there, Dan, as we kick off the new year at kind of a low for options search interest?
Well, I don't know. I mean, owning a couple of websites myself, I feel like the term options is pretty vague. I mean, there's some people typing in options might be looking for calls and puts, and some might be looking for, vacation options or, some sort of any kind of option. So I don't know. I feel like that one's sort of a tougher term to measure by.
Fair enough. So we shall keep rolling. We did drill down even farther. Let's go to options trading. How does that sound, Dan?
All right. Yeah. Let's check that out.
That's more in our neck of the woods there. Options trading, listeners. Interestingly enough, options trading had its peak for search interest exactly a year ago, the week of January 2nd through 8th of last year. So we came out of the gate hot last year in terms of interest in options trading from a Google search perspective. Interesting times. That was, of course, we were kind of at the apex for the year for the markets as well. At the lows for the year for volatility. Vol itself, VVIX was somewhere around a 109, 110. So looking frothy there, still triple digits there. It was an interesting time. And clearly folks were searching for options trading. The low came in November 20th to 26th. So obviously the Thanksgiving holiday period, not a boom time for people looking for options data. Well, that low was 48, so pretty much got cut in half. We have since rebounded about 10 points from that to about a 58, closing in on a 60 right now. So we're closing in on 2/3 of the interest that was this time a year ago, Dan, for options trading. What say you?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty interesting because volumes have been up. You would think search terms like this would be up as well. Kind of trying to wrap my head around that one. I mean, because it's down a fair amount. I mean, it could be that, there was definitely a massive amount of interest last year at this time. And it could just be that people searched then, took some classes, got good at it, and they drove the volume. But boy, you sure would think that this would have some more hits. I'm a little befuddled by that one.
Yeah, it is. It doesn't really jive with the volume numbers we're seeing. That is for sure. So at the end of the day, volume is what counts, right? But still, intriguing stuff. Let's go a little bit farther down the rabbit hole. Let's go to volatility, Mr. P. Volatility. The apex for volatility searching came the week of April 24th to 30th of last year. That's where it pinned the needle at 100, listeners. And the low was a 42, and it's actually right now. Nobody gives a crap about volatility right now either, Dan. I think a lot of this is still kind of holiday bias. People are still kind of waking up from the holidays. We're just coming in from the new year, so folks aren't really out there searching for some of these terms yet, but still intriguing stuff, sir. What do you think? People really loved vol back in April and not so much right now.
Well, I mean, I'm a little surprised, for sure. Just playing armchair quarterback looking at it, I wonder if part of that came from the problem with the VXN or VXX rather. And because that consequently is one of the factors that led to VIX futures and options volume becoming significantly lower last year. And so, yeah, I think volatility trading is a little bit less in favor than it used to be. Although, to be fair, this is another one of those terms that is general and transcends just options, our world. So, I don't know. I mean, a year ago today, it could have been election volume, political volatility, could have been other things.
I'm looking here for what the time frame was for that whole Barclays debacle with VXX, because you're right, that could have played some part, and certainly in the peak of interest being in April. Looks like it was March 14th, some of the first notices I'm seeing about that. So yeah, towards the end of Q1, getting into the beginning of Q2, it seems like is when they first started showing some of those issues. That could maybe be feeding into why April, because it was a month later. So intriguing stuff there. Let's keep on rolling. Let's get to a specific strategy, listeners. Let's go out to the covered call. That's pretty specific. If you're searching for covered calls, you're kind of only looking for one thing. And the peak for that came also exactly a year ago, listeners. January 2nd through 8th of last year. The low came, and again, I don't have the low here. It looks like it was around 48. The low came in September of last year, interestingly enough, September 18th to 24th. And we have rebounded off that low now, right around 57. So rebounded about 10 points from there. But still half to 2/3 of what we saw interest in covered calls a year ago, Dan. So the trend continues lower, this time on covered calls, sir. And the apex, once again, exactly a year ago.
That is a little bit befuddling as well. But that said, if I'm not Google sometimes changes its algorithm, and I know that they did change it last year, and I'm not exact. I kind of have to look back because, I just don't keep such tabs on there where I remember exact dates of when things happened. But I'm wondering if maybe that could have something to do with it, just how Google counts some of these searches, because it just doesn't make sense with the increased volume. It just doesn't make sense.
All right, let's drill down even further, Dan, to a search term that I know is near and dear to your heart. Let's go to options education. If you're searching for that, maybe you're finding a show like this. Maybe you're finding somebody like Mr. P out there. The high for options education, Dan, came May 8th to 14th of last year. So not typically a hot period for the markets. The old adage, sell in May and go away, starting to kick in right around that time. We usually don't see a lot of fun, frothy turbulence in the options world around that period. But for whatever reason, options education burying the needle on May 8th to 14th. And the low is pretty low right now. It's about a 16, and it's right now. So we're far off those highs. I will point out, though, listeners, there is clearly some seasonality to this one. Folks are just not searching for options education during the holidays, because as of a week or two ago, this number was about a 67. So it was much higher even a week or two ago. It's just fallen off a cliff in the last couple of weeks, hence down to 16. So, Dan, clearly over the holidays, nobody searching for options education, but I expect this one to perk up a bit in the new year, sir. What say you?
Yeah, I'm looking at this graph now as well, and I guess it'd be interesting to go back over time and look at seasonality, because, just looking at 2022 kind of makes a lot of sense to me. There was definitely a lull for searching for options education over the summer and around the holidays, in late December. And that's exactly what I would expect. That's when I see some of our students taking vacations, going away, showing a little bit less interest, and then seeing it pick up in the fall and or the spring. So this one's not really surprised me much. This one, because it is pretty near and dear to my heart, it seems about right.
I mentioned we did just put out for our listeners our top 10 episode spectacular from last year. Mr. Dan, folks always love those episodes, and make sure they got a little taste of that to end the year last year. But I'm curious for you, Dan. You were on all those episodes last year. Are there any that particularly resonate or stand out to you that are your favorite from the year? And then B, what do you think were our audience favorites from last year? What were the top episodes that they were downloading last year, sir?
Oh man, I would love to see that. What their favorites were, because that just gives us some great feedback of what people are interested in. I know I did like a really in-depth one on credit spreads, a really in-depth one on time spreads, which was really fun. I like the ones where we really drill down a bunch. I mean, those are striking my mind a lot more. Just off the tip of my head, I guess probably because they related to our credit spread genius and time spread genius, scanners. So it's pretty near and dear to my heart as well. Geez, man, I don't know. Do you have the data?
I have the data. We released the episode last week, so you could have cheated and listened to it if you wanted out there. But I'll give you a hint. Not all of them came out last year that were the most downloaded during the calendar year of last. That's all we were looking at so I'll just give you the top three, Dan. And the number three top episode of last year, also the highest ranking episode that came out last year, was actually our top 10 episodes of 2021 Spectacular. People loved that. It came out on January 5th, so just made it under the wire. It didn't come out in December of 2020. Came out in January, or 2021. Came out in January of 2022. You folks loved it. That was your number 3 overall most downloaded episode. Also, the top episode from last year that actually came out last year, because the other two, number 2, number 1, are not from last year, Dan. It gives you a hint. Do you have any other guesses you want to make? I gave you a hint. The number 1 episode is the same as it was the year before. I'll give you another hint.
What? The top episodes?
Yes, the top episode. I'm not sure if number 2 is, but number 1 is definitely the same as it was from the year before.
I don't know. Was it something on volatility?
Our number 2, I'll give you a second hint. Our number 2 overall episode for last year, Options Bootcamp, episode 2, entitled appropriately enough, The Greeks, came out on April 11th of 2012. Does that give you some insight into what number 1 is, sir?
Well, I guess it's got to be on the Greeks as well. Was it on a particular? Didn't we do a big one on?
You're missing the obvious hint. Episode 2 is episode 2. Episode 1 is episode 1.
Oh.
The first ever episode of Options Bootcamp. It reigned supreme the year before, and it reigned supreme last year as well. People are coming into this show en masse, Dan. They are discovering it new every month, and they're going back and starting from the beginning. And they are listening. That's why we remastered that episode. Hopefully all you new folks have listened to the remastered version. We cut it down a little bit, made it sound better, removed some firms and some platforms that don't even exist anymore. We're going to do that with more of the episodes for you, because clearly you folks are loving the older episodes. So yeah, Dan, once again, the archives come through strong. I kind of like that. It means people are discovering the show and they're going back and doing the legwork. They're going back. They're not just starting at episode 170. They're starting at episode 1. I like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I listen to some podcasts sometimes, like real estate ones and Italian language ones and just random podcasts. And I love doing that. I love starting at the very beginning, because it really shows you that, just the evolution of it, and you get to know sort of the hosts better and that kind of thing. I mean, if they're like topical, like news based, then maybe you don't want to do that. But our show, it's all just knowledge. So our show's great to binge from the beginning.
It's a very bingeable show. Let me just put it that way. You know what else is bingeable, listeners? It's your questions. Let's get to a little bit of the old mail call.
Mail call. Time to look at questions submitted by our listeners.
All right, everybody, welcome to the mail call, the portion of the show where you folks take the reins, your questions, your comments. And Dan, I love all of our listeners, whatever platform you get it on. Scott Somer, he's been a regular listener for a long time, likes to listen on YouTube. And he consumes the show, Dan, the literal second it is released. He is listening to it. I feel bad because this question came out He responded a few minutes after we posted our last show last year. We just haven't been live for a couple of weeks to get to it. As you recall, our last episode, we were talking about, someone had a question about international brokers, and we were debating, he was in Australia. We were debating which brokers were viable and approved in Australia. Do you recall that, sir?
Yeah.
Well, Scott chimed in and he said, Tastyworks has an Australian operation for Australian customers for U.S. market access. So he wanted to get that out there. So, Scott, I appreciate your instantaneous feedback. Unfortunately, we've been off for a couple of weeks, so we just got to it now. I forgot the name of the listener who was asking for that. But if you are an Australian listener, we were kind of debating IB. We said, the big ones here like TD won't really work, but some of the others will. So we kind of came down on IB, but sounds like Tasty maybe an option for you there as well, listeners. If you're in Australia looking for it, that's why I love our audience. They're so helpful, Dan. They'll help each other. They'll help everybody else. A great bunch. Even if you listen on the old YouTubes, we love you all over there as well, listeners. Let's go out really quickly, Dan. Let's go to our actual question of the week. We just had our kind of end of the year guessing game for VIX. That's always fun. And again, listeners, you can play along at options or questions at theoptionsinsider.com if you missed that, if you want to register your guess for the chance to win fabulous prizes. And then rub it in Dan's face because you got the Lamborghini and he did not. But our question this week, Dan, is actually another good seasonal one. We do this every year at the beginning of the year to kind of gauge people's sentiment. It's that time again. Dan, we're kicking off the new year with our annual January question. If you had to buy a 10% out of the money call expiring the end of the year, December 31st, on one of the following products, which one would you choose? Gave you 4 choices. So your SPY, your SPX, your S&P 500, or Bitcoin, or WTI, the old crude oil, or VIX itself. Dan, if you have a guess, have at it. And then more importantly, what do you think our audience is voting for, sir?
My guess would be the S&P 500, Spider's SPX. Although, boy, I don't know. I'd almost like to sell out of the money calls on all 4 of these because I think I'm going to win on 3 out of 4 at least.
That is not an option, sir. That is outside the parameters of our poll.
Yeah, I mean the least ugly girl at the party is the S&P 500, I think.
Yeah, well, at this time last year, Dan, our audience was firmly bullish. At the time, by the way, when we posted this last year, brace yourself. Some of these numbers may hurt, listeners. SPX was at 4,600. VIX was at 22. Bitcoin was at 40,000. And WTI at 78. So WTI not that far removed from it. VIX not that far removed either. But SPX and Bitcoin, obviously, far, far away from those levels. Last year, you folks were overwhelmingly bullish for the equities. 33.9% of you choosing a 10% out of the money call in the SPX or SPY, followed by about 27% for crude oil, then 25% for VIX, only 14.3% of you like in Bitcoin at those levels. That at least turned out to be a good prognostication. Of course, no joy for the index. S&P obviously down about 20%. If you want the NASDAQ route, even worse, down about a third last year. Dan, this question just went live a little bit before showtime. This will be our question of the week now, listeners. You can go vote on it as we speak at options. And right now, Dan, in the early voting, our audience is once again going back to the S&P well, 46.2% choosing SPY or SPX. We have an actual tie for number 2, 23.1% each for WTI and VIX. And bringing up the rear, once again, 7.7% for Bitcoin, sir. What say you? Does that surprise you?
No, not really. I mean, VIX has sort of a ceiling. Like it can spike, but we're talking like on the actual end of the year, that would be a miracle. I think it would be very surprising for VIX to be there. But oil, like anything could happen with, we could speculate on that in this crazy world these days. That's not a bad spec. Bitcoin, geez, I don't know about that. I think in the long term, I'm a crypto fan because of its importance to Web3, but Bitcoin, I don't think it is important to Web3, not as much as others. And I just think we got a lot more road ahead of us before we see a rebound in any sort of crypto. So I don't know. I mean, overall, I'm not terribly surprised. 41% for the SP 500 seems like the right call.
All right, listeners, that music means that'll do it for our first episode for the new year of 2023. A lot of great fun stuff in store for you folks here on Options Bootcamp this year. Episodes coming up about zero DTE options, all sorts of fun in store. Remember, if you guys have a topic, a question, something you'd like us to discuss on the show, send it in. We're always happy to address them here on the show. Maybe it's an interesting topic. Other people probably have that same question. Might be worthy of devoting a full episode to here on the show. We'll get out of here on this comment from Options Queen, one of our pro members listening live right now. She's been scarily precise with her vol prognostications out there on our Vol View show, listeners. So take what she has to say to heart. She says, I definitely agree that this is a good show to listen to past episodes. It doesn't get old. Oh, thank you. I have actually re-listened to episodes when I need more info on something previously discussed on the show. Thank you for that, Options Queen. Clearly, the audience agrees with you. They've been binging and mainlining all of the archived episodes. Remember, you can find the show pretty much wherever podcasts are found. If for some reason you can't find the early episodes, our website and indeed our mobile app are the two best places to get all that good stuff there for you. And Dan, if folks want to reach out to you with questions about any of this fun stuff, where should they go? What should they do?
We want you to reach out. We would love it. And you can do so by going to markettaker.com, 2 G's in a row, and, contact us there. You can join free, join and be part of our community, get some complimentary classes there. And we'd love to be of any assistance to you we can.
There you go. Check them out. Markettaker.com is the place to go. We got to get on out of here. That will do it for our live content for today. Brian will be coming up for OPR a little bit later today. He will be live to tape, so you'll be getting that on the on-demand side. Then back again live for all you cool cats in the Secret Club tomorrow with the Option Block, our first episode for the year. That should be a fun one, as well as, of course, the first episode of TWIFO for the new year as well. A lot of you folks really mainlining TWIFO a lot towards the end of last year. So happy to see that. Hope you enjoyed our kind of end of year look back there where we broke down the cross asset correlation across all the different crazy products that they trade over there at CME. If you want to know how Bitcoin stacked up against the equities or crude oil or gold or any other product, that's the show you need to check out. It's a fun one. And then back again on Friday, of course, for the first volatility views of the new year, as well as the first options oddities. I do believe the Rock Lobster will be back for that one. And then back again next week, another great episode of Options Bootcamp. Stay safe out there, everybody.
You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com.